What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Fluff Hammer. Today I'm going to be taking you through weathered transfers. So these are going to be on my Imperial Fist Spartan. Obviously these techniques will work for any legion or any army. In fact, you just need to work out obviously your chipping colours and stuff like that if you want to do the weathering. So first off, we're just applying the transfers in the normal way. So I'm cutting them out as closely as I can. I didn't have a scalpel blade with me today. I'd left them all at home, which was a bit frustrating, so I did have to use these scissors. I would recommend, if you are able to cut the transfers with a scalpel, it's a much smoother and cleaner process, so I would do that. As you can see here, I'm just making some notches into these, just make them a bit more malleable, and also just getting rid of as much of the excess clear transfer skin so we don't have that showing up too much. Obviously we're going to mat it down as well afterwards to make it, not look like a transfer, so it won't matter a huge amount, but obviously the more you get rid of, the less you have to worry about the final look, and also it will make it easier to get a nice fold on your transfer. It doesn't make as much a difference on these flat surfaces, but if you're doing shoulder pads and stuff, you're better to cut these as cleanly as you can and as neatly, as close to the actual design as possible. Next up, we're going to lay out some water. I'm just going to do it on the desk in front of us just for the video. Normally I would just do this in, say, like an old takeaway tub or something like that. But yeah, it's just easier on the desk here. I'm just going to use a couple of drops of water. Doesn't matter what water, you can just use anything. Tap water is absolutely fine. And we're basically just going to lay our transfers in there while we start the process. So we're going to be using Microset and Microsol. Personally, I think this is the best stencil application fluids available on the market. They've always been absolutely fantastic for me. I found them really easy to use, very consistent, and genuinely bought these bottles like 7, 8, 9 years ago. Like, they have lasted for almost a decade. They're still, as you can see, probably like 95% full. So actually they're a really good investment. If you're going to be doing any sort of transfers, they last for years. So what we're going to do with them is we're going to start with the blue one, the Microset, and we're just going to layer a little bit of that over the areas where we want the transfers. And after that, we're going to keep our brush wet with the Microset and just move your transfers about on the tank or the surface, wherever you're doing it on, and move that about until it's perfectly level and exactly where you want it. Next, you can use either some folded up kitchen towel, or what I'm using here is a slightly damp makeup sponge. And once I've got them exactly where I want them, I'm going to press down directly, as directly as possible, as to not move the transfer, but to make sure and try and clean up as much liquid from underneath them as possible. Leave that stage to dry for a good kind of 10 to 15 minutes. And then I'm going to be using the back end of a paintbrush, and I'm actually using just a little knife I've got here. This is much easier and much better with a sharp scalpel, but once again, as I said, I didn't have one to hand. I'd left them all at home. And basically what we're looking to do here is to just do some little nicks and scratches out of the transfer. So it's to make it look like this was painted on, and the weathering and the battle damage has just kind of knocked and taken away pieces of the perfect paint job, almost giving a kind of bit of realism to the transfer. Obviously in a tank that is as heavily weathered as this one is, where I've put a lot of battle damage on it, rusty tracks and stuff like that, it would really throw the eye to have like these absolutely perfectly painted on bright crisp white designs. So yeah, that's basically the reason. Again, like I said, this is much easier with a nice sharp scalpel blade. You just have to be very careful with your pressure, not to obviously scratch the paintwork underneath or damage it, but this technique is forgiving because it is battle damage at the end of the day. So if you do end up nicking the paint job with the scalpel, this is something that we can easily remedy in the later steps, so don't worry too much about that. For here, the key is to just keep it as still as possible and just make some small battle damage. You aren't trying to kind of rip the stencil to pieces. And like I said, with these bits here, it would have been so much easier with a nice sharp blade. But instead, all I had was this little knife we use for opening parcels. But it will do. This is the thing with Warhammer. You've got to just use what you've got to hand and try not to cut yourself. Okay, so after you've finished doing your battle damage, we're going to go back to the makeup sponge, or again, like I said, you can use a folded up, lightly damp piece of kitchen roll to just dab them down to try and make sure they're as flat as possible. And then we're going to go into the Microsol. So this is more of like a solvent style as opposed to the set. And what this will do is it will really dampen down that transfer. It will soften the plastic and it will make it blend much easier into the surface. It will also help reduce any kind of bubbles and stuff underneath it. And as you can see with the battle damage here, I'm able to move around any loose bits of the stencil with the brush, so I can just make sure that's looking exactly as I want. And then I'm just going to put a couple of layers of the Microsol on to the transfers to keep them kind of settling down. And after that, I'm going to leave it a good 15-20 minutes to dry. You can reapply a second layer of this if you want, and personally I do that, and I do find it makes for a much better time of things. Next up, we're going to be going in with the secret sauce, the AK Ultra Matte Varnish. This stuff is amazing. Through an airbrush is preferred, but once again my airbrush is at home and I'm at the studio, so I'm going to be just applying it on with the brush. The key here is to just move it nice and quickly, move it as smoothly as possible, and just layer it on nice and thin. I ended up doing 2 coats of this over the transfers just for the video, so you can see how much of a nice smooth effect it gets, and also how matte you can get these transfers. Next up, we're going to be weathering with some chocolate chipping from AK. If you are using the Citadel range of colours, this colour is identical to Dryad Bark, so either or will do this exact same job perfectly. And what we're going to do is just apply a little bit of that to our palette, and we're going to be using a fine brush. I think I'm using a size 0 from Artis Opus here, and we're basically just going to add some battle damage in where we've been doing our weathering on the transfers. We're going to start just adding some tiny little bits of stippling to the paintwork to just really give that kind of chipping effect to match all of the other battle damage around the tank. And as you can see, here is where you could correct if you had done any damage to the paintwork with the scalpel. Obviously, being able to correct that damage with any sort of chipping and weathering is actually really helpful. So you can cover up any little mistakes here and there. And also just doing little bits of chipping, making sure you're getting over the white and some over the black areas of the transfer, just to really sell that battle damage. The brown will hardly show up on the black, but it will just help to make it look more coherent, as the battle damage will go through the white, through the yellow, and you'll still see very faintly on the black. So you're just going to neatly go around everything now and just do battle damage. And here we are. So that is the finished effect. I'm just moving the tank around here so you can see it at different angles. I think the transfers fit perfectly in with the tank body. You can see the battle damage is consistent with the rest of the battle damage across the model. These transfers really look like they were painted on when the rest of the tank was painted. And yeah, we've got them nice and matte. There's no visible kind of plastic lining or anything around them. So I hope you enjoyed the content. I hope you found it really useful. If you give it a go, please tag me on Instagram at FluffHammerPaint or on Twitter at FluffHammer. I'd love to see you having a go at it. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe, please hit it a like, please give me a comment, whatever, just to let me know you enjoyed it. And I'll see you all in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.